Yeah, we're live.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Media Association for Peace monthly webinar. My name is Ray Lapalkin, and IMAP is an association of the Universal Peace Federation, which we refer to as UPF, and it represents a global network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media and are committed to work together for the achievement of a world of peace based on the principles of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. UPF is also an NGO in general consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations and was founded by Dr. Sun Myung Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, who have worked and dedicated their lives to fostering global harmony and understanding and tirelessly advancing for peace and reconciliation. Today, we'll be discussing the topic, promoting a socially responsible and moral media in a post-moral world. And our moderator today is Peggy Yujiri. Peggy lives in Denver with her husband, Kenji, and they have 3 adult children. And Peggy has been serving as a executive director of UPF in Colorado, and she's also the Rocky Mountain coordinator for IMAP. And she has over 40 years experience in organizing interfaith and intercultural conferences and promoting faith-based values in the United States and internationally. Welcome, Peggy.
It's my pleasure to introduce this webinar. The topic today is a morally responsible media. We find that over the past decade, social media platforms have gone from being seen as virtuous connectors of human beings to globally despised promoters of misinformation, hate speech, porn, and exploitation. Online media platforms have virtually eliminated print media and given a bully pulpit to those who excel at creating controversy and division. It's well documented that the increase in internet usage over the past decades is a major factor in increased social isolation, mental health issues, and religious disaffiliation. The consequences have disproportionately affected youth and therefore families. Today's youth are the first to grow up in a world immersed in social media. Vast amounts of information is at their fingertips, but so is porn, exploitation, hate speech, bullying, fake news, and so much more. So today we have 2 panelists that are very active in the field of promoting socially responsible media and moral media. And I'm very honored to have them here with us. We have, first of all, I'd like to introduce Wendy Francis, who's joining us all the way from Australia. Wendy is the National Director of Politics for the Australian Christian Lobby. She's a recognized spokesperson for the rights of children and women and an effective campaigner against sexual exploitation in all its forms. Wendy has written 4 children's books and was a contributing author to the book The Greens, Policies, Reality, and Consequences. Wendy is the director and board member of Samaritan's Purse Australia, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Associations, and Vision Media Australia. She and her husband, Peter, have been married for 45 years. Very good. They have 3 married children and 11 grandchildren who are the delight of their lives. And I'd like to introduce Penny Rankin. Penny's the past president of Montreal Council of Women and today serves on the National Council of Women of Canada board as the VP of Children and Youth. In 2020, she helped found Canadians for Action, an informal collective of NGOs and professionals from across Canada dedicated to raising awareness and advocating for legislation directed to protecting children from online abuse and exploitation. She began her career path in the UK as a columnist for the 70s trade magazine Media World and also worked in London broadcasting to help set up the new commercial radio network in the UK before joining a prominent advertising agency there. Back in Canada, she's an active member of the Anglican Church of Canada. She chairs the Sexual Exploitation Working Group of the Canadian Council of Churches and is a spokeswoman on human trafficking, as well as chair of the Mission Standing Committee of the Diocese of Montreal. She's a mother of 3. She and her husband live in Montreal. So please join me in welcoming Wendy and Penny. Thank you. So we're going to start off by posing some questions to our panelists and let them talk a little bit about how they have addressed these questions or answered these questions in their work in their respective nations. Our first question is, Wendy, given the pervasive shift to a worldview in which there are no moral values or absolutes, I don't want to say no moral values, but no moral absolutes, what can people of faith do to advocate for a moral media?
Well, Peggy, thank you so much, first of all, for having me. And it's a privilege to be here with Penny today. I really see that as a privilege, so thank you. I think there's a few things that people can very easily do. The first one is to get involved. People need to not just sit on the sideline and worry and complain, which we all can tend to do when we see media doing incredibly immoral things, but we need to be involved. So for one thing, we can train and become a journalist. That's one way to get involved. We need people who are committed to truth in this field. It's a mission field. But the other way we can get involved is to make sure that we meet with journalists. Now, journalists are always looking for a story, but they often have an inaccurate and sometimes a scary opinion of people of faith. They really do. So they need to meet people face to face and realize that we are reasonable people. We are people of faith, but we are people who have many common values with every other citizen around us. But so the contact details are usually on, you can find them on the newspaper or in the web because they want to be ready, available, because they want to get story links. So invite them to a coffee. Pay for that coffee, but get to know journalists. That's one way, because then when you have something you want to say to them, they realize that you're not a scary person. But I think also we need to contribute ourselves via social media. Social media can be a pit. We need to change the tone, and we can go on there to social media and we can speak truth in love, and we can change the tone. We need to support good people on social media, but we need to be actively involved ourselves. And we need to make sure that we are not contributing to the hate, contributing to any vilification. We need to be on there to actually, change the tone. But what we need to make sure we're doing is speaking on social media as if we were speaking face to face and not hiding behind the social media anonymity. We need to speak to people respectfully, but with facts. The other thing I want to say, and I don't want to take too long, but I want to say that we need to be in contact with our politicians about our media, because the laws determine what media can and can't get away with. Our laws do that, certainly for advertising, but even more worrying are new bills, new laws, new legislation that are being brought in. So in Australia, for instance, if I can just speak briefly to Australia, we have laws coming in at the moment that are called misinformation and disinformation legislation. And these laws are going to target anything, any content that the digital platform provider, so it's not the individual, but if the digital platform provider deems anything misleading or reasonably likely to contribute to harm, or if that's contrary to the government position, then they will censor that information. Of course, when we talk about harm, that includes vilification of any group distinguished by sexual orientation or gender identity. And we know, don't we, how broad the definition of vilification can actually be. So the Australian Communications and Media Authority, so it's called ACMA here, whilst what they should be doing is safeguarding the free speech of Australians and monitoring hate speech, obviously, but instead what they're going to be doing is requiring digital platforms to control the public discourse here in Australia. So in essence, this government organisation will become a ministry for truth, if we're talking about Orwellian type conversation. And so this will be from public health to politics to the economy and all the ideologies that are out there. They will determine what we can say online. So it's highly likely, and this is already being proposed, that posts regarding abortion, for instance, or the dangers of puberty blockers for children, they would be deemed as harmful, and any criticism of trans ideology, for instance, would be deemed as vilification. And so the rights of one minor community would seem to be more important than the rights of people of faith, and certainly women who are very concerned at the moment at the removal of their spaces in terms of their trans ideology. And so Facebook, Instagram, X, and all these other digital platforms will be forced to silence legitimate concerns of Australians. And it's important also that I note that digital platforms can be penalised for non-compliance with the government, but they will not be penalised for over-censorship. So it's hard to know where this will end. And this is why I say we need to also be engaged in politics, and we need to be engaged in pushing back on some of this legislation that's coming in, because it can be concerning, very concerning, actually. Thanks, Peggy.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'm just going to reiterate some of the suggestions you made. Become a journalist yourself, get to know journalists, contribute through social media where you speak the truth respectfully, and also get involved in politics when it comes to safeguarding the freedom of speech of people who are speaking from a faith perspective. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you, Peggy.
How about Penny? Would you like to share something?
That's a tough act to follow, to be honest. And I agree. Thank you, Wendy, for that, and also Peggy and everyone for inviting me to be here. It is an honor to share the platform with you. I agree with what Wendy has said, particularly when it comes to, well, most of it, but particularly when it comes to the importance of making allies with people in the media. And this is best done, and as she rightly says, by the cup of coffee. This is about creating personal relationships with people, because you're not going to be able to transmit or engage with somebody at such a person unless you can do it at a very personal level. You can have a very compelling story, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a journalist is going to pick it up. But if you have a personal relationship, that will happen. I've had that on my own. That has been my experience here in Montreal, having established relationships with some people. Interestingly enough, I find reaching out to journalists who are associated with political newspapers is another way of doing it. There's a newspaper here in Canada called The Hill, representing the parliamentary Hill, and developing relationships with people that work there is exceedingly helpful, because they also have ins with politicians themselves. But not everything always works. And I think that's one of the things that when you're doing this kind of work, you have to be patient. You have to recognize that you're really and truly not going to. I know sometimes I think it's a no-brainer that we want to protect our children. Why is it so hard that we have to fight so hard to protect our children? So one of the things I am learning, sometimes painfully, it's going to take time. I'm very impressed listening to Wendy about just how swift it seems to be, the legislation process, or maybe I'm concerned as well, in Australia. Canada is lagging behind. We're very much behind what's happening in the United States, particularly when it comes to issues such as implementing age verification measures. We, unlike the US, but certainly like Australia, are signatories to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And one of the strongest arguments that I have in conversation with community groups, with journalists, with politicians, is why is it that we aren't complying with international laws that really prioritize children's rights and well-being? One of the things I also, listening to you, Wendy, is that you pointed out how important it is to engage respectfully with whoever you're talking to. And the other side of that coin, which I know is clear, just looking at you, I can see that, is it's also the art of listening. You know, we really have to be able to listen to what's behind what's being, what we're hearing, especially if we're trying to not convince somebody, but help engender a real alliance with somebody. I'm trying to think of what else I wanted to say. Politicians, yes, we need to be engaged with our politicians. When you see small initiatives, even if they're small initiatives in a local church, where they may be hosting, I don't know, a rummage sale, for example, and the money is going to be directed to care of individuals trying to leave prostitution, for example. Support that, encourage people to get involved, make them aware that faith communities are incredibly active in terms of the work that they do in raising awareness, raising funds, and doing it from a place of love, a place of deep concern. I noted too, when Peggy was making the introduction and she was talking, she said, it's not so much, we weren't talking so much about values, we're talking about moral absolutes. I still believe, generally speaking anyway, that, the notions of helping the family, helping your groups, reciprocating, when somebody has given you something, you tend to reciprocate back. Try and engender that kind of a relationship with individuals, with groups, with politicians, with everybody. Politicians, it might be a little bit difficult. But the other thing you need to be is brave. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's this blessing called the uncomfortable blessing. I don't know if you've heard of it. And it says, it really, one of my favorite lines, if I could pull it out in front of me, I would, but I don't have it in front of me. But it says, let's have the grace, let's dare to pray that we can be foolish enough to believe that really we can make a change in this world. It's an uncomfortable blessing, but I really believe that we need to be brave and we need to trust and to move forward if we're going to really tackle some of these issues. I'm not as articulate as you, Wendy, but there you go. That's me. That's my 2 cents or 2 pennies.
Thank you, Penny. So in addition to supporting a lot of the things that Wendy said, you mentioned the importance of some kind of absolute values like being patient, engaging respectfully, encouraging others, that faith communities are important, that we should be brave and trust that what the efforts we make will not be in vain. I believe. Could either of you, would either of you like to share a story about when you did engage with a journalist and you found that you were able to shift the conversation or really impact that journalist's viewpoint or way of reporting?
I can.
Yeah, you go, Penny, and I'll add on after you.
Okay. I mentioned the Hill. There's a journalist that I actually I met through a friend at church, and he was very unfamiliar with what was happening in terms of the lack of efforts on the part of the Canadian government to really move forward with legislation to protect children, particularly children online. And it was just one of those quiet conversations. I didn't have to pay for the coffee or tea because it was in the church basement after service. But we sat down and had a long, involved conversation, and it really impacted him. You know, it really touched him. So he went on, I put him in contact with a senator here in Montreal, Senator Julie Méville-Duchesne, who is the author of a bill that we're hoping to see passed here in Canada, which is directed towards protecting children from exposure to online harms, and particularly pornography. And since then, he has written a number of different articles, and that support for her work well, it's not going to be a guarantee that this bill is going to go through at all, but it certainly has helped raise awareness of it across the country. So that's one little story.
Mm.
I've got a few as well. I think Penny and I would both have a few. We could go on for the rest of the hour about this, but one of my stories is that I was sent by a friend, I was sent a screenshot of a Facebook post from one of our leading same-sex, gay, homosexual sort of media outlet that's here in Brisbane. And it was speaking about me very disrespectfully and actually saying things that weren't true. And so, you know, what do I do? So I wasn't on the website, but I was sent this clipping. So what I chose to do was to private message the journalist and say, what you've put on here is defamatory and it's not true. And you actually would know that it's not true. So we've got two ways of doing this. Like, I can take this further because I really you shouldn't have done this, or you'll let me buy you a coffee and we have a coffee and you meet me and then think about writing a different story. And he came straight back and said that he would meet me, no problem. And so we had coffee in town, and then he wrote this story, and we left still on a completely different page of what we believed about things, but we left actually friends. And at the end, he asked, could I take a photo of you? We took a photo, and his story about me in the gay paper was the most surprising coffee date I've ever had. And it was with Wendy Francis. And he still said things in the story about how wrong he thought I was. So, you know, that I didn't change his mind about how wrong he thought I was. But from that time on, he had my mobile and he would ring me at lots of different times of the night and we would stay in touch. We haven't been in touch for a while now, but I can tell you I made a friend that day. Instead of, I could have actually really made a very strong enemy. But I made a friend. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. That just shows the power of showing respect to even your opponents. Yeah.
Yeah. Because as Penny said, like, I think one of the important things Penny said was that we've got to listen to people. So why is it, and this young man's name was Chad, and you can still Google and find the interview online. Why is it that Chad hated me so much and felt threatened by me? I need to actually listen to that, because whatever I've done or whatever perception he has of my faith or my position, what he's reading is different to what I actually feel or I am. And so the listening, I think, that Penny mentioned is really important. So it wasn't just me going to show him how nice I was at this coffee. I needed to actually hear. I wanted to know why did you write that? Why did you think that I was like that? Because obviously I have given a wrong impression to this young man as well. So I need to learn every bit as much as I needed to sort of clear my name as well.
That's a very good point. Penny, I'm gonna start off with you on the next question. How can media companies be held to account for content that is harmful to society, including children and families?
I think it's a humongous task. And as I've already mentioned, I think Canada is a little bit behind the ball as far as this is concerned. I found it very hopeful back in March of 2021 when the convention did bring out Comment 25, calling, for example, for age verification measures to be implemented to protect children from encountering age-inappropriate content online. And as I also mentioned, it stuns me that we still haven't seen, real efforts to respond. But there are jurisdictions that have, notably in the EU. I know that in Australia there were efforts, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, and then there was some pause, and I believe that things are moving forward again. And I won't go into Australia since we have the perfect representative here. But it is surprising. As much as we all are keen and interested in protecting people's privacy and their right to speak, etc. To me, what I feel is that we do not prioritize our children enough. When you think about children's rights, the whole movement has been, it's been about 100 years really since the first convention or declaration was made in terms of our responsibilities towards children. I think that was 1924. And now, we've moved through many different variations and we've developed a broader picture. And this 2021 step was an important one because, frankly, as you said in your introduction, Peggy, the children of today are children who have grown up with the internet. I mean, this is an extraordinary social experiment, really, and we don't know where it's going. But we do know one thing, unfortunately, is that our ability to respond with laws is like moving through molasses, whereas the industry itself, whether you're talking about AI or whatever, is moving and developing at a rate that is lightning speed. So this is a real challenge, and I think I've lost content in terms of what the what the exact question was.
How we can hold people accountable.
But what we can do to hold them accountable, I mean, really and truly, what we need to do is we need to develop these laws, and we need to have specialists in place and we need to not only develop the laws and push them through. We need to prioritize our children. We need to make sure that policing and oversight is independent. If there's going to be any kind of oversight, it must be third party. You can't ask a porn company to self-regulate, for example. It's in terms of the process of what we can do as individuals. We need to educate communities so that they understand the dangers of not moving forward on these stories, on these issues rather. We're heading into a year where we're going to probably have an election here in Canada. And yes, there are a number of bills, for example, that are being percolating. We have an online harms bill. I've already mentioned Senator Julie Méville-Duchesne's bill, but it's really unlikely that those are going to be the issues that people are really going to be focusing on. Understandably, housing is an issue, economic things are an issue, but protecting children, generally speaking, is still not being prioritized. So until we can push for them to be prioritized, particularly in the digital environment, it's again back to patience. Holding them accountable, we can hold them accountable, but only by demanding of our government to put into place laws and regulations, and then moving that step further and enforcing it. That's it. Sorry. It is sorry.
How about Wendy? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of, it's bad, but I'm sort of encouraged, Penny, that you think Canada's lagging behind with the age verification, because I'm so frustrated here in Australia as well that it's taking so long. And people say, oh, you can't do it. Well, actually, we already do it with gambling. We have age verification legislation for gambling. My 13-year-old grandson would find it very difficult to go online and gamble. He would have to steal his mother's credit card and her driver's license, but he can go onto hardcore pornography without any block at all. So very frustrating. But how we hold them accountable is that we call them out, and we don't get tired of calling them out. So many times we call people out on things that are harmful, and when we lose, and we often sort of find ourselves hitting a brick wall. We give up, and we can't give up. So we've got to call them out, and we've got to call them out well. We've got to call them out with good research. We've got to call them out without falling into the same trap as them. So no hype, no exaggeration, just the facts, the truth. We've got to push back against fake news and lies. At the moment in Australia, and I know this is slightly different than the topic we're talking about, but we've had an ABC report on our Australian soldiers who were fighting in Iraq against ISIS. And they showed video that they had touched up, they had changed the video to make these Australian Special Forces in a helicopter do a round of shots from the helicopter against one person, an insurgent on the ground, instead of what it actually was, one warning shot over the head of this man on the ground. Now, this is diabolical because it fitted into a narrative of bad behavior in Iraq of soldiers. Now, whether or not there is bad behavior of soldiers in Iraq, I'm not going into that. But what they did was they inserted a round of shots, like 6 shots instead of 1, and they were caught out because people didn't give up. And it has now been quite public that this was a doctored video by ABC. Isn't that absolutely shocking? And so we can't allow that to happen. So what I do quite regularly is I'll put in freedom of information requests. So if there's a media report that puberty blockers are entirely reversible for children, I will put in a freedom of information request to find out what research are they basing that on to say that the children are not negatively affected by puberty blockers, because I don't believe it. And there's so much research coming out that puberty blockers are affecting children long term. So I'll put in a freedom of information request and I'll make that public so that it just calls them out on out and out lies. You know, I put in a freedom of information request to find out what was the age of children being treated at gender clinics here in Australia, and it came back 3. So 3 years old children are being treated at our gender clinics, and that's a freedom of information request. So nobody can deny that because it's come back. So we've got the freedom of information request from the government. 3-year-old children are being treated at gender clinics in Australia. So I can go out with that and push back on any of the lies that are coming from the media. I think, you know, some wise person in the past said that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And so I say to people, if you see something, so if you're walking even through a shopping centre and you're seeing pornography in the windows that your grandchildren are going to have to walk past, don't ignore it. Also, can I say, don't walk into the shop. So if we're talking about, okay, there's a lingerie shop and the windows are pornographic and it happens. Don't walk into the shop and go mad on the girl behind the counter, because it's actually got nothing to do with her. And she's probably in there trying to earn some money for university. But what you need to do is go to the top. So you go to the advertiser, you go to the shopping centre themselves and say, this is making the shopping centre not suitable for children to come into the mall because they're seeing pornography in the window. So I say to people, don't go into the shop and have a go at the people in the shop. They are just working there. But don't walk past it and do nothing either. We need to call this out. Yeah.
That reminds me of a story as well, if I can interject. And thank you. You're inspiring me, Wendy. Back in 2020, Christopher Nicholas Kristof wrote an article in the New York Times. It was called "The Children of Pornhub," and basically accusing Canada of doing nothing, which of course they were doing nothing. And this is where I made my first contact with one of your colleagues, Pierre Beauregard. And we together were part of this group we formed, Canadians for Action. And what we did was to call out MasterCard and Visa, because MasterCard and Visa were both having their products used on the Pornhub site. And we looked at MasterCard and Visa's own internal rules and regulations about the type of the restrictions they had in terms of who could use their product or not. So we we wrote letters and made sure, again, making connections with the press, and within a week they had withdrawn their support in terms of Pornhub and their services in Canada. The same thing happened in the United States as well. So that's an example in terms of what can be done. And I find Wendy very courageous. It's really wonderful to have this opportunity. I know that this is being directed towards sort of informing other people, but I'm finding myself informed as well. So I appreciate this opportunity as a learning experience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. I had a feeling you two would hit it off. Well, our next question was to name some success stories, which you have already done, I think.
Yeah, tick me off.
But if there's something else you'd like to share, that would be welcome. But I also go ahead. Did you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say I've learned so many lessons myself how to do this over the years as well. So because one particular one, probably 5 or 6 years ago, we have a very big exhibition in our city. It's called the ECA, and it's short for the Royal Exhibition, and it's a big show, and everybody goes. It's massive, and it's over a week. And my husband and I went on the first day, and we were walking through the sideshow alley with all of the rides, and the children's rides were there, and we walked through the children's area, and there was a full-on wall painted with very explicit women wearing very little, and it was just this graffiti sort of thing in the children's area. And I was ropeable. Like I felt so angry. If I'd had a can of paint, I would have, splashed it everywhere right there and then. But I went home, and what I did, and I shouldn't have, this is one of my learning lessons. I started one of those viral sort of petitions, one of those petition sites. Went onto that petition site, and I just started a petition to close down, to stop that, what happened. And I put in the email address of the CEO of the ECA. And so overnight, he got like 8,000 emails, and all these people signed, because everybody was the same as me. They were shocked that it was. And the next morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, he rang me. So I don't even know how he got my number, but he rang me and he said, "Wendy, I wish you'd come straight to me, because if I'd known that was down there in Sideshow Alley, I would have covered it up." And it has been covered up overnight. We've got big tarpaulins, but we'll paint over it. And he was so nice to me. And I actually felt really sad, because it got in the newspaper, because Wendy Francis was on her rant again, sort of thing, and it reflected badly on the ECA. And if I'd just gone to him first, and if he had said, "Sorry, too bad," then I could have gone to the petition site, but I should have gone to him first. But I would count that as one of my successes, because it certainly got taken straight down. But I learnt from that. Go to the people at the top first and be reasonable with them. Give them an opportunity to act well, because I could have made an enemy that day with him. And fortunately I didn't. And he was like, it's gone, but I learned that day, a process, do the right process, and don't just overreact yourself as well. But we have, I'm sure Penny and I could go on again with lots of successes, but there's probably sadly less successes than we would like.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good way to put it. But as long as you don't give up, it's not a failure, right?
Yeah, that's
No,
right.
you don't give up. That's for certain. You
Yeah.
definitely don't give up.
Well, come to this question. What are some ways that you found to successfully use the media to generate awareness, gather feedback, and connect with allies? Besides, trying to stop things you don't agree with, how can you gain support and gain allies through the media? Wendy, do you want to start off this time?
Sure. Well, I send out regular media releases. I have a platform. We use a media release platform that we pay a subscription to. And so I send out media releases. And so what I can do on that platform, and this is something that probably everyday people wouldn't have access to, but get in contact with organisations such as Penny and myself, and we can help people know who the journalists are. But what I've found is I can tell on the media releases which are the journalists in this particular area that I'm writing on that are opening my media releases more than 60% of the time. Because across industry standard, probably media releases are opened about 25% of the time. Our average is around 30%, so it's a pretty good average of open rate. But there are some journalists who I can tell open it over 60% of the time. And so I know, okay, that person either really dislikes me or they really like me, and I need to find out which it is, so that I can, sort of feed them some of the research and stories that I'm working on in case they are interested, because they obviously do follow our media releases. I do think social media is also another way. Find the people on social media that are speaking your language. Social media can be an awful pit, but I think we really need to be in there and responsibly and find the people that we can connect with. And then again, I think what Penny and I have both said over and over during this interview, and it's been a lovely interview, Peggy, thank you, but we've both said get connected with journalists. When you are connected with journalists, listen to them, but speak the truth in love. Always be reasonable and respectful. They have a job to do. Their jobs are hard. Journalism is not an easy place to be. There's not as many journalists these days. There can be journalists who can get lazy and get their news from X, but most journalists are really trying hard to do well. And they have their own bias in the same way as I have my own bias as well, and I've got to check for that. But stay connected with journalists, whether they are liking you or not. I think that that's the way that we can actually generate awareness of our issue. If the only time you contact or a journalist only hears from you when you're opposed to them, then they're going to be less likely to listen to your feedback or include you in their network. We want to be included in their network because they know we will be reasonable and respectful, but we also have an angle that's possibly different to what they would hear from other people. We need to be helpful to them. They need to be able to see us as this person can add something.
Yeah. I was going to double back on something we said a little bit earlier and apply just what you said, Wendy. And that is, when it comes to our politicians, sometimes they're not the people we need to speak to. It's the people around them. So the assistants,
Yeah.
that is also an important contact to engage in and approach, just as you've said just now, approach them in the same way. So you're not always on the attack saying, how could you not do whatever? No, you have to find, a calm approach, and as a political analyst friend of mine says, if you are going to make a suggestion to a politician, it's always a good idea to give them a couple of, I've been thinking about this, and I've thought there's this, this, and this. And of course, you want number three to be the one he picks up on or she picks up on. But there's an ego behind somebody to a certain extent that goes into politics, and you want to give them a sense of power, as though they have made the right choice. That's another little aspect I think is important in doing this work. I'm not as directly engaged in the same way as you are as National Director of Politics with the Australian Christian Lobby. The National Council of Women, my role includes or focuses on children and children's rights. So this is just one corner of the work that I do. I do note, though, that looking at UNICEF and their reports, that Australia and the well-being of Australian children compared to our peers, so 38 other different countries, 38 countries that fall into this group, Australia does do better in terms of the well-being of the children in your country. So I think maybe you had a lot to do with that. But anyway, there we go.
Thank you. And what are some ways that you can expand your reach through the media? In other words, that more people have a chance to hear what you have to say.
Well, we host, either through the Canadian Council of Churches or through the National Council of Women, our Montreal Council, different things, or even the diocese. We put together in-person or hybrid events where we invite the public. We do interfaith groups where we bring people of, all backgrounds across the city here in Montreal, and host information sessions. Workshops is another way of approaching these issues. Storytelling, really, it's a question of trying to engage on a one-on-one. I think there's been a real shift. I don't know whether I'm sure this is the same in Australia as well, but there's been a real shift about how people interact since COVID. So on one level, there's been the advantage that the internet provides us. Here we are on Zoom today, engaging with each other across the globe. So we've been able to harness those advantages to our advantage. As an organization, historically, we would have always been meeting, face to face in live settings. And to a certain extent, there was a hesitation to move online to do this. But when COVID happened, we were all forced to. And that has proven excellent because it gives an opportunity for us to not only engage with facts and data and information, but there's the opportunity for storytelling, for people to tell their personal experience, and that can be very moving if that's what somebody wants to do. Of course, you would never want to force somebody into it. And so essentially it's education programming and things like that have been really helped us network out. Traditionally, an event that was hosted today here in Canada, that I think you attended, Peggy, that normally that group would only be a handful of people, and as it was, we were 4 or 5 times that today. These are ways that we can start to reach out to the broader public, and so far it's been quite effective.
Thank you. And Wendy, I know I watched several of your YouTube Fridays with Francis. And I wonder how do you grow your viewership? Are you a YouTuber yet?
No, it's something, isn't it? That funny things go viral and then all of a sudden they're a success. I think, you know, I look for opportunities of when the voice will be more welcome or more listened to. So for us in Australia, we, like the US, are heading into an election period. And in an election period, it opens up more opportunities to speak about some of these issues because we can ask the big questions and we can get commitments or otherwise from different parties. So we can ask questions. I think the one thing I would say about that too, though, is I say to people, don't ever make empty threats. So do this or you'll lose the election, or do this or we'll do this or whatever, because usually they are empty threats, and people respond better to when you appeal to their common decency, when you present them with facts, when you present them with something that it goes across the board, people agree with. And like Penny said, I think, you know, basically family values is something that is still something that people would wish for in their heart, even if they don't necessarily get on the bandwagon. So appeal to their common decency, appeal to their empathy, but don't manipulate. So I guess for me, I try to I appeal to people, but I try not to move across that line to use manipulation, because then I think that you're doing exactly what we don't want to do. But so look for the big opportunities. Certainly in election time for us, it's a big opportunity. We want to ask questions about what are you going to do about prostitution legislation. We want to ask questions about will you have a CAS-like inquiry into the gender fluid ideology stuff? What are you going to do about pornography and age verification legislation? And people are interested in the answers to those questions at election time, because it does make a difference. And once you can get the media and politicians on board on a certain a stream towards something, then following the election, it's easier then to follow it up and try and get them to do what they said that they would like to do before the election.
Can I ask Wendy a question, Peggy?
Oh, sure.
Sorry for sort of changing the thing. Why is it in Australia that you've accepted age verification in relation to gambling? What was the reasoning as to why they wouldn't then automatically apply it to all age inappropriate content? So in other words, pornography. Why are they protecting pornography? What was the argument?
The argument is pretty shocking, to be honest, because the argument is to protect people's anonymity. So nobody is embarrassed about going on and gambling and betting on a horse or a football game. And particularly in Australia, sport is just our God, to be honest. So nobody is embarrassed about that, and they don't want to have to hide. They don't need to hide that, but they are embarrassed still about accessing pornography. And the people in the up of the hill, we call it the hill as well, who would be voting for this legislation, they might have to put in their details to access something that at the moment they don't have to do. So they on their credit card, they don't mind if the TAB, so that's one of our big betting, agencies, it's not a big deal for them really if they've put $100 on a horse. But they don't really want their wife to be able to see that they've put it on some X-rated pornography site, even if it's legal. And of course, we're talking about legal. So anything illegal is already illegal here in Australia, and people can get in trouble for that. But we're talking about legally obtained pornography for adults. And they should be, if it's all okay and it's all above board, why do they not want that detail out? But they don't. Because deep inside the human heart, we know that that is actually exploiting somebody at the other end. We are engaging in exploitation. We are engaging in immoral behavior. And so, yeah, it's not a game like gambling is as a game.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, our time is almost up, but I'd like to ask each of you if you'd like to make a closing comment. Penny, do you want to start?
Well, I want to start by thanking you, Peggy and Ray and Pierre and Hans, and of course you, Wendy, for inviting me, or for being here. Like I said a little earlier, I feel that I'm coming away with this with some insights and approaches that I will definitely be applying in my own work. I think in terms of closing, it's almost better to think in terms of a prayer. I think we need to recognize that each of us who has in their heart and has been one way or another feel themselves called to work in this area. We can't do it alone. We certainly need each other. But the real doors that open and the real opportunities that present themselves are, to me, a product of grace. And sometimes I forget that. Sometimes I think we all forget that. So it's my hope that the kind of work that you're doing together and the kind of work you are each doing as individuals, it is my prayer that we are all find the time to be quiet enough to remember who's carrying us through all this work. It's humbling, but it's a really hard path, and we can't do it alone. I really just want to thank you for the opportunity of meeting you all. And as I started out with the uncomfortable blessing, I seem to be ending with an uncomfortable or awkward prayer. But my prayer is that this work, even if we ourselves do not see or are rewarded with the positive outcomes in the next days or weeks or even years, or maybe even in our lifetimes, but what we're doing is important, and we're part of something bigger. And there's no foolishness in attempting to change what we know to be really a sad aspect of the human condition. So those are my final words. But thank you. Mostly it's thanks.
Thanks for
God bless
that
you.
beautiful
And God bless you.
Wendy?
Yeah, that's really special, Penny. Guess I just want to say amen to everything you've said, and thank you all. God called us to come into his kingdom as a child. And I think the significance of that is a child is innocent, a child is trusting, and so it is children who are most affected by what we've been talking about today. And I believe that, God would have us fight for the children's innocence because it really matters to him. And so I would encourage everyone to be engaged, be involved, don't give up. Not everybody can be engaged like Penny and I or Peggy or the others on this call, but we can all pray. And Penny's call for us to not neglect prayer is probably the most important thing that has been said in this call. And I would just say also, God doesn't call us to be successful. It's him who will do the work, but he does call us to be faithful. And if that's being faithful just in prayer, then it's not just in prayer, because that is the most important aspect of all of our engagement. So yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I've enjoyed the conversation very much.
Thank you. And we're just so honored and privileged to have two women of such courageous efforts, but also deep faith to join us on this program. And I think that what you have said here will inspire many people. And it's inspired me. And I just want to say thank you to you both for taking time to come on. And I hope
Peggy, thanks, Penny.
together again.
Thank you. God bless. Take care, everyone.
Okay, good night now.
Good night.
Good night.
Good morning.